Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I paint some abstract art on a piece of cardboard. I use cardboard as my canvas, and I take advantage of the properties of cardboard. It's corrugated, so it has texture, and I tear up it so that the paper is exposed with different colors and textures. And it's very affordable. From there, I'll paint on it with pastels and darks, neutrals, and fun colors. And then I add a layer of spatter. This is a great project because it's a great way to practice art without the expense of canvas. And the finished result can be tucked inside a junk journal as well, or used as the cover of other journals. At the end of the video, I'll have a screenshot of various shapes that you can use if you want to create this project, and various line art leaves. So let's get started.
So here is the little masterpiece we're going to create, something along these lines. And I'll tell you the parameters, and then you can choose how you'd like to do it. Now, I start with a piece of cardboard. You can cut it to any size you want. This is about 4 by 5 inches. And as you can see, it's just shipping material. If I want to put this so it's freestanding alone in a junk journal, well, I'll cover the back with something, either paint or just some paper. But I can also adhere it to my page in my junk journal, or I can just use it as a practice canvas. It's very affordable. What I like to do is to vary it a little bit, but it follows some basic rules. Here's another version, and here's still another version. You could see the different sizes. They're very effective. I have some shapes in the background, any number, 1, 2, or 3. Then I have a main focal point. I'm using leaves, just the hint and the shape of leaves. They can be filled in or outlined. And then I have a little spatter on top. And I'll explain the process that I go through creating these. It's really interesting. At the end of the video, I'll show you some variations on this technique as well. So now to start, you want to create your canvas. Cut your cardboard to whatever size you want, whether it's 4 by 5 or 2.5 by 5, or just a little one, 1.5 by 2.5, and then get started. So I start with a little cardboard, and the next thing I want to do is tear it. If you don't want the torn corrugation to show, well then don't tear it. But I like to tear it. I just take a little bit with my fingernail up top, and I kind of just tear it and pull it down. And then I'll go to the other side, the bottom maybe. Again, just use my fingernail to get in here and pull aside. You can even do a third one if you want. The idea is to get a little variation on your canvas. So I'll reach in here and pull. And I like that, even if it's just a little bit, it just peeks through. Now as you see, when I tore it, I have the smooth cardboard and then the torn edge up here. When you paint on cardboard, the water from the paint is absorbed into that cardboard and can cause it to collapse and whatnot. So what I like to do is take some clear gesso and I just paint it on my cardboard. This step is optional, but it does give a better result. So to this end, I'll just take a little clear gesso, maybe just a little bit more than that. And then I just take a silicone tool because I don't want my brush to be covered with gesso. And then I just brush it along. Now, the clear gesso is kind of white when it's on and wet, but it dries translucent, and in some cases totally transparent, depending on the surface. If I have a lot of gesso in the crevices here, I'll either take a paper towel or my tool and just work it out. I don't want there to be a pool of this gesso. And so now I'm just going to let this dry. I'll show you how it looks when it's dry. So now it's been about 5 minutes and my cardboard is dry. You can still see some little areas where there's a lot of gesso by comparison, and it's still opaque. So that part isn't quite dry, but the rest of it is, and that's the surface I'm going to paint on. The gesso creates a little bit of a chalky finish. You can't see it, but you can certainly feel it with your finger. Instead of being smooth cardboard, it's got a little bit of grit to it, but not a lot. We didn't use a lot of gesso. So now the next part is to decide the organic shapes we want to create and the number of them. Now the way I decide the number of shapes and the shapes is based on the area that I'm working with, which would be any of this area that isn't corrugated. So this is a rather large piece compared to that little small one. So I'll make 3 shapes. I like to stick to odd numbers, but not exclusively. So for choosing organic shapes, I have a little template that I made, just has some different organic shapes. And I can sketch them out. One thing to note is I want my eye to travel across the shapes. And I don't want them to be one here, and one here, unless, of course, I'm going to come back in with my leaves and connect them all, lead that eye. I like to add some overlap, and if I don't have overlap, I at least like to have a direction with my organic shapes. So I'm going to start with a template and create just a circle. I have a lot of room up here, so I'll create that circle, just using a colored pencil here. And then I'll figure out what other shapes I want. The beauty of this is that you just play around. So maybe I'll make just kind of a kidney shaped shape. And then since I want my leaf to maybe come up and around here, maybe I'll have a shape up here. Maybe just a rectangle. Now these all overlap. You don't have to have them overlapping, but I like that effect. So the next stage is to color them in and choose my colors. What I like to do, because the cardboard has such a beautiful color, is choose colors of paint that complement it and still stand out. So light colors, pastels work beautifully, creams and whites. I have just some craft paint here and these 3 beautiful colors. So that's what I'm going to use, 3 separate colors, and I'll paint those shapes. I have a little brush here and I have my paint, and I'll just go to town creating the shapes, the colors I want. It's really up to you. I'll decide which one I want to be on top. And I think I'm going to have this little one on top with this one underneath it, and then the circle underneath that. So I'll go in here and just paint very gently, and I'll speed this along. I'll paint that shape. This is a soft blue. It's called Cloudless by Apple Barrel. And I'm just going to rotate my canvas, and I might have to paint 2 coats. The gesso does help to use less paint, but it's also nice to really just get a nice opaque look. If you don't like the opaque look, then you can paint fewer coats. There's a lot of variation here, and that's what makes this so fun. So there I have one shape, and now I'll color in the next. Take this green. There's not a lot of contrast between the blue and the green, but there is some. And I happen to love these colors. Now these craft paints do not take very long to dry. 10 minutes and it should be bone dry. You can speed it along with a hair dryer, or if you keep the distance from your painting, a heat gun. You don't want that paint to bubble up. I like to just go over it, make sure everything looks opaque, at least for the first coating. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. We are going to put a focal point, so it will cover up some of the shapes here. So now I need this to dry before I add the next 2 coats. So I'll let it dry and we'll come back and work on it some more. First coat is dry. It's kind of haphazard. I want to go over it with another coat to really get a nice opaque shape. So now that it's dry, I want to come in with my last color, and I'll do a couple of layers of this, just tracing that shape. Because it's yellow, it's a little bit lighter pigment, might need 3 coats, but that's the beauty of it. You just play around until you get the look that you want. It's a little intuitive because if I paint it and I'm not crazy about it, I'll just alter it some more. Can always add in more shapes or even change the shapes that are here. And the beauty of it is because it's just cardboard, if ultimately I feel like it's a failure, I can just throw it out. So I'll let this dry, add another coat, and we can come back and start our next layer. So now that this is dried, all 3 shapes, or whatever number of shapes you choose. So again, I have a little template here where I've sketched a bunch of leaves, You can do an like skeleton leaf here, which is just an open leaf like these, or you can fill them in. You could alternate the leaves evenly, like, let's see, well, like this one or this one. Or you could not alternate them evenly, just kind of play around. It's very forgiving. Now I know with this shape, I have all this space to play with. And I know whatever shape I make is going to lead the eye across my little canvas here. So I want to start by making my stem. And because these shapes are nice and rounded, I want a little contrast. So I'm going to go with some pointy leaves. I'll start here and make my stem, just make a little sketch of my stem. And it crosses over at least 2 of these shapes. And then I can come back and decide how I want them to be. I like this one here, so maybe I'll create a pointy leaf up top here, and then I'll follow that shape. The white really didn't show up, so I'll kind of just play around with it here with the gray. And now I'll keep them side by side and make my sketch. As I get to the bottom of this leaf, I want my leaves, my little petals here, to be even larger. So I have my sketch there. And now I want to choose a color. Because I went with pastels, I'm going to choose a darker color to paint my leaf. So here I have a darker green, a hunter green, and this blue. It's called ink spot. I'll just blend them together. I get kind of a turquoise, which is still pretty dark, particularly in comparison to the colors I've already used. You can even use metallic paints or different paints for this. So now I'm going to come in with a little round brush here, taking the color, sharpening the tip of that paint, and then I'll start by painting the stem. This helps guide me. If the paint is too thick on the stem, I know I have to change the shape of the petals there. So I like that. I'll come in here and just do some of the petal work. This brush is fairly thick, so I'll have to come in with a smaller brush just to refine the tip and to work on these little stems as well. So I have the petals of the leaves down, but the shape is very rough. So I'm taking an even smaller brush, and now I'll actually carve out the shape. Demonstrate on this top one, getting that nice point. I'm really making sure the shape looks good overall, and then filling it in. And then I'll just go down and do the lines, connecting the petals to the main branch. I like how it's much thinner than that line, the main line of the stem. You can even play with direction a little bit. Give you an example right over here. I want to make sure I have a nice pointy tip because I like that contrast with those organic shapes to have a little point here. And I'll just fill in more of that shape. And so there I have my leaf done. I can go back over any areas of the stem or the leaves that aren't quite as opaque as I'd like, and just play around with it. Take your time, make it the way you like. And now before I start the last process, which is the spatter, I need to let this dry. So now that this is dried, I want to come around and use my spatter technique. I just take one of the brushes. The smaller brush you use, the smaller the spatter will be. So if I tap it here gently, I'll get one size spatter, and if I tap it up higher, I'll get another. I just took a neutral, a black paint here, and I'll mix it with some water to make it a little loose. Again, this step is optional, and you can certainly change the color. So I have a lot of paint on my brush. I'm going to start up top here and just tap. And I can maybe come back in, get a little more. And so I've finished my piece. I'll let this dry. And now I'd like to show you some variations using this same theme, same steps, just varying the colors, the shapes, and whatnot. So here we have our finished piece all dried. Let me show you a few variations. In the same size family, I have this one and this one. So again, I stuck with 3 organic shapes, continued with the spatter, and then I have different leaves for the focal point. I also have slightly different variations of the torn paper, and the contrast between the pastel shapes and then the darker colored leaves, the points or the smooth edges, is interesting, as is this corrugated cardboard. I think it's kind of a bunch of contrasts, and that makes it enjoyable. Let me show you some other variations. So for the thinner size, there's these 3, which are certainly quite different. This shape goes to the edge. This is a lot of corrugated cardboard up top. And this one just has a single organic shape in the background and metallic paint for that leaf. I love that one. And then I couldn't resist doing 2 little charms, little small versions. Oh, I think they're precious. I have a bunch of little art masterpieces that I can add to my junk journals or to use accordingly. Just very fun. I like to have these on hand. I could continue adding different paper, using them in collage, or even cutting them up, depending on how I want to use them.
So that's how I created abstract art on cardboard. It's a fun process using just craft paints and paintbrushes. It's a great way to use up packing supplies or repurpose materials and spend time on the process and not worrying about the result. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And if you'd like additional content, I post videos at least twice a month for members, behind the scenes videos as well as additional techniques. Thanks for joining me today.